Today on Matt Walsh Show, a viral video shows a female quote-unquote pastor explaining why God wants us to kill babies. This is the kind of satanic heresy that's infiltrated many churches across the Western world. Also, the Covenant school shooter's full journal has finally been released, and now it's very obvious why the authorities didn't want us to see it. Plus, the latest viral TikTok trend is actually just check fraud. We'll talk about all that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. In just 9 days, Am I Racist, our first ever theatrical release, hits theaters nationwide. Coming up later in the show, I've got an exclusive sneak peek to share with you. But right now, head on over to amiracist.com for tickets and showtimes near you. There's a book by Taylor Marshall called Infiltration, the Plot to Destroy the Church from Within. The basic idea of the book is that the enemies of the Catholic Church spent several millennia trying to destroy the church from the outside before they settled on a much more effective plan, infiltration. They would try to work their way into the church and subvert its mission from inside. And we've seen this happening in front of our eyes, not just in the church, but in many other Catholic institutions. The signs are everywhere. If you walk onto the campus of pretty much any allegedly Catholic university today, for example, what you'll find is unrecognizable from just a few decades ago. Here's a report from the Catholic News Agency from just last year, quote, "In the wake of the Dobbs Supreme Court decision overturning the pro-abortion rights Roe v. Wade ruling, several bodies at the University of Notre Dame are hosting an event series dedicated to reproductive justice. The series has attracted criticism for its decidedly pro-abortion slant. An abortion doula with a tattoo of abortion equipment is one of the speakers at its next event." The article notes that the series was sponsored by the University of Notre Dame's Gender Studies program, which apparently exists for some reason. And evidently the Catholic perspective on abortion, actual Catholic teaching on the subject that is, was not even presented at these events. They didn't even try to grapple with it, even though that's supposedly university policy. Catholic teaching is supposed to be the fundamental guiding principle of a Catholic university, obviously. But pretty much all the major Catholic universities are like this now, from Georgetown to Villanova to everything in between. There's been a lot of coverage of what's happened at these schools, so there's no need to belabor the point. What hasn't been covered to anywhere near the same degree is the extent to which left-wing radicalism has infiltrated Christian churches of all types all over the country more broadly. So this is a clip from a year ago that's just starting to get attention now. It's from someone claiming to be a pastor at something called the Church of Reconciliation, part of the Presbyterian Church USA, named Rebecca Todd Peters. She's also a professor of religious studies at Elon University in North Carolina. And once again, as she's speaking, the topic of abortion doulas comes up. Watch.
If Jesus were here today, he would be a clinic escort, distracting women from the hatred of the protesters, or an abortion doula, holding women's hands and offering support and love as they end their pregnancies. And I expect he would have a stern word for self-righteous legislators who use abortion as a political issue rather than showing compassion for the people seeking abortions. Today, on this Roe Sunday, I wanted to share some of the stories we have collected because these are the sacred stories of women's lives. If Jesus were giving his sermon today, he might also have said, "Blessed are those who end pregnancies, for they will be known for their loving kindness." I have been pregnant 4 times. I have had 2 abortions, and I have 2 amazing children. Each of my reproductive decisions, to have children and not to have children, were sacred decisions because they reflect the moral responsibility of reproductive power that is part of our inheritance as human creatures. Each of you has a reproductive story. And given that 1/4 of American women will have an abortion by the age of 45, I imagine some of your reproductive journeys also include abortion. Blessed are those who end pregnancies, for they will be known for their loving kindness. Reimagining our theological understanding of abortion is essential to addressing the violence that is being done to people across the country in the name of Christianity. In the face of the rampant reproductive injustice in our society, what does God require of us? Amen.
Now, on one level, it's no surprise to hear abject heresy from a female pastor. The existence of female pastors is already a heresy. Scripture's very clear on that point. St. Paul stated it explicitly throughout his letters, and he wasn't exactly gentle or subtle about it. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, he tells women to keep silent, quote unquote, in the church. And this is a theme that he returns to in other letters, which means that a church with a female pastor must, at the outset, eject St. Paul from the biblical canon entirely. You cannot keep both Paul and your female pastor. And that is to say, you cannot keep the Bible, because once you start stripping the parts out of it that you don't like, what you're left with at the end of that process is not the Bible. It's some butchered husk of what was once the Bible. It is the gospel according to you. It is a religion that you have invented for yourself. Now, we should note, by the way, that St. Paul is not the only reference point on this issue. Jesus Christ himself chose 12 apostles. They were all men. Jesus did not abide by the tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion when selecting apostles or when doing anything else. He selected only men. So if Rebecca Todd Peters was around in the year, 30 AD or thereabouts, I suppose she would have gone straight up to Jesus and given him a stern lecture about the importance of inclusion and the need for greater female representation. Then perhaps she would have tried to convince him that anyone who harms a child actually shouldn't have a millstone tied around their neck and be thrown into the sea, as Jesus clearly says in Matthew 18, but should instead be celebrated as a feminist hero and awarded $500 million in taxpayer funding. That's obviously the position that Rebecca Todd Peters holds on this subject, as we just heard, after claiming that Jesus would have shepherded women to abortion clinics. Todd goes on to say that she's had 2 abortions herself. She says she personally works as an escort at abortion clinics every month or so. And the escorts are the people that escort, well, as the name suggests, they bring the women, basically bring them from their cars into the abortion clinic. And you might ask, well, why do you need an escort? Why do you need someone to do that? And the answer is that sometimes there are pro-lifers outside of the abortion clinics, not screaming at them or harassing them, but just praying for them. And sometimes you might have sidewalk counselors that are trying to give them information, literature, to let them know that there are other choices, there are other options besides killing your child. And the abortion clinic doesn't want these women to know, even though they claim to be pro-choice, they actually don't want the women to know that there are other choices. They don't want them to know that. So they have escorts that their whole job is to make sure the woman as she goes in is not exposed to any other information on her way in. So that's what Rebecca Todd Peters does. And then she launches into a pro-abortion riff on the Beatitudes, saying, quote, if Jesus were giving his sermon today, he might have also said, blessed are those who end pregnancies, for they will be known for their loving kindness. Now that's obviously not just a misreading of the Bible, it's a satanic inversion of the biblical message. Peters wants us to believe that not only is it morally acceptable to kill your own child, but that it is somehow an act of kindness. It's a sort of kindness to the child that involves brutally killing him and then discarding his body in a medical waste dumpster. Now, something tells me that Peters would never want anyone to be kind to her in that way. So here, Peters, just like every other pro-abortion pastor, quote unquote, is playing the role of the serpent in the garden in the book of Genesis, basically, tempting her confused followers to commit unspeakable sins and promising that they'll be rewarded for it in some unspecified way. Now, this is a woman who, among her many titles, serves as president-elect of the Society of Christian Ethics. She was apparently the vice president not too long ago, and she just got a promotion. And that's her elected position. The woman who says that Jesus would love abortion, who's killed 2 of her own children and admits to it, brags about it, is calling herself a leader in Christian ethics. And other people calling themselves Christians evidently just go along with that. Now, to be clear, this is not a one-off sermon. This woman has been using her position to promote abortion for some time. In USA Today, for example, she wrote, quote, "I did not make my abortion decisions despite my Christian identity and faith, but rather because of it. Christian values that support healthy and secure families also require careful, thoughtful, and morally rich consideration about the decision to become a parent or not." End quote. Of course, the decision about whether to become a parent or not is over the moment a child is conceived. At that point, you are a parent, whether you like it or not. It's too late to be not a parent. You will never be not a parent ever again. The only decision you have to make at that point is whether you'll be the parent of a living child or a dead one. But Rebecca Todd Peters, a self-described Christian ethicist, doesn't see it that way. Basic tenets of Christianity like don't kill people, thou shalt not commit murder, especially don't kill your own offspring, these kinds of things have to be turned on their head. And that's because the religion she preaches is not Christianity at all. It's the religion of self. It's the worship of the ego. It is Satanism, in other words. There are a lot of lessons to draw from this person. One of them is that it is simply not possible to be a pro-abortion Christian. That's something that doesn't actually exist. You cannot have both. You cannot be Christian and also pro-abortion. Now, we can argue about the subject of abortion on secular grounds, and even on those grounds, the pro-life argument wins easily. But if we're debating the topic as self-professed Christians, there's really nothing to talk about. I mean, the pro-abortion position cannot survive even a moment of scrutiny because the child in the mother's womb is a human being created by God in his image. And that's something that if everybody involved in the conversation is Christian, that's something that they should all affirm. You can't not affirm it. Conception is a miraculous event. It is the moment that another divine image bearer is brought into existence. To kill and discard this child of God, to shed the blood of your own offspring, is an act of unspeakable evil. So that the quote-unquote Christian argument for abortion is that, sometimes God makes children in hopes that we will kill them? It is a morally psychotic position. It's blasphemy of the most vile kind. That much is very clear. The other lesson we might learn is more political, and one you've heard me say a lot recently especially, which is that Republicans should not be so terrified of this issue. And this minister is proof of that. I mean, the left's position on the topic of abortion, as evidenced by the clip I just played, is just viscerally disgusting and repugnant. All Republicans have to do is highlight this and stop letting the left set the terms for the debate. The kind of footage I just played it's disturbing to every sane person. You're unsettled by it. It's creepy. It's terrifying. But it's very often hidden, or at the very least, it's not widely discussed. And that was the case with the footage of this woman's sermon, but it needs to be exposed. All you have to do is point to it to win the argument. Just point to what they're saying. Say, hey, everyone, listen to what this woman is saying. Now, this is an especially extreme and deranged example, but the broader message from these con artists is always the same. They always want to convey the same general idea to Christians, which is this: do whatever you want to do, and God will endorse it because it's what you want to do, which is, of course, the diametric opposite of the gospel message, but it's what various heretical Christian organizations and churches are teaching all over the country. It's why we have groups like Catholics for Choice and Dignity USA, which says it's building, quote, LGBTQ plus inclusion in the Catholic Church. They're all constructed around the idea that if you want to kill your child or identify as quote unquote non-binary or whatever you want to do, you should be able to do it because you want to do it. This kind of heresy has reached epidemic proportions. It's what supposedly Christian churches are teaching all over the country. The website Protestia, I think I'm pronouncing that right, has collected several other examples. Here's one of them from another Presbyterian church in Birmingham. This is supposedly another sermon that happens to involve telling people that they're entitled to a lot of free stuff from the government. Let's watch.
Jesus never mentioned abortion, but he did talk about poverty. Remember when the rich man asked what to do to inherit eternal life? After loving God and neighbor, Jesus urged him to sell all he had and give it to the poor. When Jesus condemned the scribes and Pharisees for hypocrisy, it was because they were using their positions to make things easy on themselves and hard on everyone else. And when Zacchaeus, a wealthy tax collector, announced that he would repay anyone he'd cheated 4 times the amount and give half of his possessions to the poor, Jesus declared that that day salvation had come to him. So how do we set our course in the direction Jesus called for? The direction that leads to salvation? How do we ensure that women and families have the health care, the contraceptive resources, the child care, the housing, the decent jobs, the equitable pay, the equal protection, the access to transportation, the good schools?
That's another female quote-unquote pastor for you. So the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, teaches us that equity is important, she says. By returning the money he stole, he somehow teaches us that we should ensure that women have contraceptive resources and equitable pay and access to transportation. So this really, that story is laying out the 2024 DNC platform, more or less. How progressive. Here's a similar moment from St. Paul's Anglican Church in Cottam, where they performed a hymn for transgenderism. We'll play just a little bit of this because it's as painful as you might expect, but here's just a very short snippet.
God of many genders, our world reflects you. Sunrise and sunset uniting our hues, woven into a city with jewels of all shades, houses of ruby and walls crowned with jade.
You know, it's not a coincidence that anytime you hear these sacrilegious hymns, that they also just sound terrible. They're just unpleasant and ugly in every possible way. They also, of course, aren't Christian in any sense of the word. But Christianity has been bastardized by these sorts of people, not just to promote abortion and gender ideology, but also left-wing racial ideology has made its way into many churches. So watch this moment from a church in Illinois. Here it is. Listen.
Now, in this fast from whiteness, of course, I cannot change the color of my skin or the way that allows me to move through the world, but I can change what I listen to, whose voice I prioritize. And so that is kind of the plan for our worship services through Lent. That we would fast for a time from prioritizing white voices, and that we would use the music and poetry of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and see what the Spirit might do among us.
So another female pastor there. By the way, I'm not cherry picking to try to find specifically female pastors saying blasphemous, sacrilegious things. It just so happens that if you're looking for examples of pastors saying blasphemous, sacrilegious things, a huge number of them are going to be female pastors. And that's because, as I said, if there's female pastors in the church, then that means that just from the outset, they've already rejected biblical doctrine and put themselves in a position of, just, well, St. Paul doesn't know what he's talking about, that bigot. Like that's the starting point if you have a female pastor, which means that all the sacrilege that comes after that is just a natural, a logical extension of that. So anyway, she's presenting, this rejection of whiteness as some grand act of selflessness, but it's the opposite of that. She's demeaning millions of people, including herself, on the most superficial grounds imaginable. That's not something people do when they're humble. This is not Christian self-denial. This is egotism, actually. And in all these cases, it's clear what's going on. Left-wing activists are infiltrating churches and attempting to subvert the fundamental tenets of the faith in order to turn it into a vehicle for their political and ideological agenda. Now, the good news, if there can be any good news when we're talking about something like this, is that the churches who preach about whiteness and sing hymns to transgenderism and extol the virtue of child murder, all of them tend to die out on their own. When you see a video of Rebecca Todd Peters preaching or any of the, quote, pastors like her, you see one of those videos, usually the only thing you see is the person standing up at the pulpit, but if the camera were to ever pan around to show the congregation, you would almost certainly see that the congregation is sparse and old and basically catatonic. The churches that have converted themselves into left-wing social clubs don't survive because there's no reason for them to exist in the first place. You know, if somebody wants to hear leftist pablum about race or gender or whatever, they can go literally anywhere else to find it. Like check in with your company's HR manager and you'll get the same spiel. You don't need to go to church for that. And if people do go to church for that, they're not going to go for very long because they're going to discover that why am I sitting here in this uncomfortable pew to listen to this thing that I can hear, again, anywhere else in the culture? Now, people go to church to feed a deeper spiritual hunger, a hunger for something eternal and true. And any church that doesn't give that to them will die and will deserve to. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. Did you know there's nearly $1 trillion of infrastructure and pandemic funds yet to be spent? That's right, there's a massive amount of money that the lame duck administration is pushing hard to spend in their last few months. If the president's able to push these funds out, we could see another prolonged inflation surge, just like during COVID. And I'm sure you remember the terrible effects that high prices had on most Americans. But there's hope. A surge in prices can be beaten. A gold IRA from Birch Gold Group is the ultimate inflation hedge for your savings in uncertain times. To see how to protect your IRA or 401k, get your free info kit on gold by texting the word Walsh to 989898. And there's more good news. Due to enormous demand, Birch Gold is offering the 24-karat gold-plated truth bomb for 1 more month on qualifying purchases. But you need to text Walsh to 989898 to claim your eligibility before September 30th. Don't wait for the president's spending spree to tank the dollar further. Protect your financial future with gold. Text Walsh to the number 989898 to claim your eligibility and make your purchase before September 30th. So let's start with what should be the last sneak peek clip from Am I Racist that you'll see before the movie comes out. If you want any more clips, you need to go see the movie to see those, you damned freeloaders. This one was released exclusively by Megyn Kelly yesterday, and in this you'll see a small snippet from the very beginning of my journey. The first person I talked to actually in the film, you'll see here, and this is a woman named Kate Slater, who's a prominent anti-racist educator. At least that's what she calls herself, an anti-racist educator. And she's the person who kind of sets me up and sends me on my journey. She created, you'll see this in the film, she created something that she calls the anti-racist roadmap. So we figured that starting this out, I need to know where to go. I need to know who I should talk to. I need to know what my journey should look like. And so we should talk to someone who, has literally made the map on how to confront your whiteness and decolonize yourself. So we start with her. And in this clip, you'll see as part of the overall discussion, there was a brief moment where we kind of focused in on an important topic. And this is where I get the, frankly, pretty devastating news that my 3-year-old daughter might be racist. Listen.
My daughter's 4 years old. I am an anti-racist educator, quote unquote. She's still watching Disney movies and she is choosing a white princess over princesses of color.
Have you talked to her about that?
All the time.
My 3-year-old daughter is her favorite princess is Moana.
Love it.
It's a good sign.
Yeah.
But then I also thought, there's a little bit of cultural appropriation here. She wants to be Moana for Halloween. Mm-hmm. So how do we navigate that? Do I go and buy the Pacific Islander native attire for my white 3-year-old?
I wouldn't.
But I guess what we might call the Moana problem here is what, on one hand, there's cultural appropriation. On the other hand, there's gravitating towards white characters.
Right.
So it's almost like no matter which way you go, you end up back in racism.
We think every space belongs to us because we live in a white supremacist society.
Is America an inherently racist country?
I think the word inherent is challenging there. If we say...
Fundamentally,
yes. America is racist to its bones. All of the...
So inherently.
Yeah.
They gon' say you racist.
Am I Racist? In theaters September 13th. Rated PG-13. Buy tickets now.
Yes, the Moana problem, and perhaps that'll be the name of my next documentary. And unfortunately, it turns out that my 3-year-old daughter, who's now 4, by the way, is racist for liking Moana, but would also be racist for not liking Moana. So, she's racist if she gravitates towards white princesses, racist if she doesn't. Racist either way. No matter which way you go, you end up back in racism, as we just heard. I think in that clip, the thing that most people will pick up on is the exchange about Moana. But notice right before that, when this woman confesses that she brought up the Disney princess thing herself, but she talking about her own daughter, throwing her own daughter under the bus, her 4-year-old daughter, for liking white princesses. And then I said, well, have you talked to her about that? She said, all the time. She has talked to her own daughter about her daughter preferring white princesses all the time, is what she says. And I believe her. Sadly for that poor child, I believe Kate Slater that she has all the time, she has frequently lectured her daughter about her racial preferences in Disney princesses. So of course we can laugh at the absurdity of this, and there's a lot of absurdity to laugh at in this film. There's quite a bit of it on display. A film that you can see on September 13th. Tickets on sale at amiracist.com. But we should always remember that there's something very dark and evil underneath all of this. Beneath the comedy is a tragedy, as I guess is always the case with comedy. But the tragedy here is societal. It's countrywide, culture-wide. And it's that people like this are out there brainwashing susceptible, gullible fools into believing this kind of garbage. And they are also foisting it on their children. I mean, what hope? You think about Kate Slater's 4-year-old daughter. What hope does she have to turn out as a normal, well-adjusted person? We certainly pray that happens. There's hope for all of us. But she's at a massive disadvantage. Like it's those of us who are normal, sane people, we can't even. It's impossible to put ourselves into the mind and the state of mind of someone who has been indoctrinated into this way of thinking, basically from birth. Just imagine what that does to someone before all the way from birth, through childhood, before they get to a point where they can leave their house and maybe encounter other ideas and be exposed to people who will tell them that, hey, you don't have to obsess over this racial stuff. You don't have to hate yourself for being white. Not everything you do is automatically racist. Before they even can be exposed to people who will tell them that, their minds are going to be so warped that it's just, like I said, tragic, but this is what we're trying to expose in the movie. AmIRacist.com. Movie comes out on September 13th. All right, let's move to this from the Daily Wire. Reports reading now, the Tennessee Star on Tuesday published the nearly 100-page journal of the 28-year-old woman who killed 3 adults and 3 children at the Covenant Christian School in Nashville, Tennessee. The journal offers a glimpse into the mind of a self-proclaimed autistic person prone to depression and obsession. The shooter's 2 most animating obsessions were left-wing ideas about transgenderism, including the idea that children will kill themselves if they cannot get gender surgery, and white privilege. The 2 themes converged in the overall format of the journal, which often takes the form of diary entries addressed to a brown girl with whom the shooter was in love. The shooter reportedly played basketball with the girl in 8th grade and had not remained in contact, but created a race-based idea of the girl in her mind. The diary entries detailed how the shooter's autistic brain struggled with different ideas like white privilege. On February 27, 2023, a month before the shooting, the shooter drew a diagram that said brain, white privilege, embarrassment of self. The shooter wrote poems about her longing for interracial sex. And by the way, if you go to the Daily Wire report, you can see the actual screenshots of the journal with examples of the text of these things if you want to see that. Nothing in the nearly 100-page journal appears to justify the FBI's claim that it was withholding it in the name of public safety. Nashville City Council member Courtney Johnson told the New York Post that the FBI said the manifesto couldn't be released because it was a blueprint on total destruction, and it was so detailed at the level of what she had planned. That document in the wrong person's hands would be astronomically dangerous. A police inventory says that there were 2 journals on the shooter's desk, 1 under her desk and 7 under her bed. So it's possible that such information was in another journal, but this journal, which appears to be the most recent, does not include any detailed information about penetrating a school or carrying out a shooting. Okay, so it's pretty clear why they didn't want this thing to be released. It's exactly what we suspected. And if you go through this journal, again, as the Daily Wire notes in the report there by Luke Rosiak, that this is not, you're not going to read this journal and come away with a blueprint on how to shoot up a school. Like, that's not going to happen. There's nothing in it that would give someone instructions for carrying out a shooting like that. There's nothing in it that would inspire someone to commit a shooting. So all of the stories, all the justifications that we heard, the rationalization for not releasing it, that this was a matter of public safety, is just not borne out by what we see in the journal. And so the real reason is exactly what we suspected, what we knew. No surprises here. This person's mind was polluted by left-wing race and gender ideology. And that's what they didn't want us to know. The only real surprise, I guess, is the racial part of it. I think based on what we knew almost immediately after the shooting, it was pretty clear to any common sense person that gender ideology played a major role in this thing, because this is a trans-identified shooter shooting up a Christian school. But all the stuff about race, it's not surprising to find that in there, but that was not immediately obvious. And yet there it is. And that's what they didn't want us to know. But now it's apparent. Now, of course, we'll hear that the journals really prove something else, that they prove that the shooter was a deranged, crazy person, and that's all that we should take from it. This was just a crazy person. There was nothing else behind it. And surely, yeah, she was crazy, but these are not mutually exclusive categories, first of all. A person whose mind is overtaken by left-wing race and gender ideology and a person who is unbalanced, I mean, there's a lot of overlap there. But here's the real question. This is the question that still has not been answered as far as I know, and may never be answered. The question is this: was the shooter, Audrey Hale, not given the treatment that she needed? Were the proper interventions not done because her derangement was filtered through left-wing ideology, especially with respect to race and gender? That's the question. Did her therapist, did her doctors, healthcare providers, whoever, did they fail to treat her? Did they fail to intervene? Did they fail to do what they needed to do and instead actually affirm her mental states because of their policy of affirmation for these kinds of ideas? And so that's the question. And not all that long ago, if you had someone like Audrey Hale, who was obviously delusional, obviously unbalanced, obviously mentally ill, and then she started talking about how she's really a boy and how she hates white people and she hates herself for being white. You know, not all that long ago, the mental health establishment would have recognized that as part of, it's part of the picture, part of her mental state that they need to address. But now they affirm that aspect of it. So they pick through the kind of delusional rantings of a person like Audrey Hale, and they affirm certain pieces of it. So they would look through this journal and they would say, yeah, well, that's troubling. That's not, you shouldn't be feeling that way. You shouldn't be thinking that way. But this stuff over here, yeah, well, that obviously is, well, this speaks to your deeper true self, and we need to affirm that. And what that means is that the problem is allowed to fester, it's encouraged, it's fertilized, it's fostered until something like this happens. All right, let's see. Also wanted to mention this from Daily Wire. Dennis Quaid's presidential biopic Reagan outperformed box office expectations over Labor Day weekend, landing in a close race for third place behind mega blockbusters like Deadpool and Wolverine. The film, directed by Sean McNamara, Stars Quaid as the former president and Penelope Ann Miller as his wife, Nancy. Academy Award winner Jon Voight is a supporting role. Reagan earned, and by the way, it has a 98% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a 19% critical rating, which might be the record for the widest gap between audience and critics. 98 to 19 is quite something. Reagan earned $7.4 million Friday through Sunday and could end the 4-day weekend with $9.2 million. Again, landing in third place behind these major blockbusters. So I haven't seen this movie yet. I intend to see it, but I've heard very good things about it. And the success of this film just goes to show yet again that audiences are hungry for stories that appeal, not to conservatives specifically, but to just normal people. Yeah, there are a lot of conservatives who want to watch movies and would like to see their own values and reflected in their entertainment. But really, what this is about is just like movies for normal people. And keep in mind, when you see a film like this, a so-called conservative film, quote unquote, and you see it perform well at the box office, you got to keep in mind that all of the obstacles, all the hurdles that a film like this has to get over in order to succeed. It's achieving that feat on a very small budget. I don't know what the production budget was for Reagan, but I guarantee it was infinitesimal compared to the budget for mainstream Hollywood films, compared to the budget for like Deadpool and Wolverine, for example. And that's a huge deficit that movies outside the mainstream have to deal with. We're contending with it right now, for our film. And we can't put $100 million towards marketing it like these other films do. We have a tiny, tiny fraction of that amount to spend. Same for Reagan. So if a movie like Reagan succeeds, it's going to be almost entirely on its own merit. And not only that, but mainstream media outlets and shows are generally not going to promote your film. I don't think Dennis Quaid was on The Tonight Show talking about Reagan. As far as I know, he wasn't. You aren't going to see like McDonald's or Walmart promoting Reagan or selling Reagan Happy Meals or Reagan merchandise. So this is a massive, massive disadvantage that a movie like this has to contend with. And I'm not complaining. And this is not me simply whining about it. I'm only pointing out that the enormity of the task at hand when you're a quote unquote conservative making a movie. And then when you have a success, you have to appreciate the enormity of that success given all of these just incredible disadvantages. It also shows you too the enormity of the failure when mainstream films flop at the box office, as they do all the time. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently when, again, going through this process now for myself for the first time with getting a movie in theaters and trying to promote it. And you see just like, you look at what you're working with, budget-wise, the very limited access you have to media outlets and all that. And you look at these other movies that just dwarf you in every respect. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars to spend. They have access to every show they want to go on everywhere. And then when you see that and these movies still flop, that's amazing too. So when you see these movies flop, yeah, it's obvious it's a failure, but it's an even bigger failure than you realize at first. When you consider how much money they're able to put into letting people know about this film and try and get people excited about it, and then to still flop in spite of that is just is pretty amazing. On both ends, it's pretty incredible. All right, let's see. Before we get to the cancellation, there's one other thing. Okay, here, this one's important. So the New York Times Magazine has a letter this week from somebody seeking advice, and this is someone who's disturbed by the proliferation of dogs everywhere in public, and he's asking for advice on this. So we're going to ignore whatever advice the New York Times advice columnist gives, and I didn't even read it, like it's probably wrong. I'll give the right answer, but here's the letter I want to start with. It says, some time ago, my mother and I went to have our weekly lunch at a New York restaurant. The restaurant allowed dogs, and a woman walked in with 2 dogs on leashes and sat down. One of the dogs sniffed my coat and got a mucus stain on it. Disgusting. Both were whimpering and whining and restless, moving around under our table. They both smelled. She then asked the waiter to serve her dogs water, so this old waiter had to bend down to the ground and place a container there for them. The dogs noisily slurped the water. Later, my mother joked that she would walk to their table panting and barking and coming inches from their legs under the table to give them a sense of how we felt. I once had a dog trample on my picnic and put its nose in my food, and the owners just said, "Don't worry, she's friendly." "We're not," I replied. I know people love their dogs and can't imagine why anyone else wouldn't, but isn't there an ethical responsibility when you're in public to respect people's private spaces? Yes, there is an ethical responsibility. The fault is 1,000 million% on the part of the dog owners in these situations. And let's start with this. Bringing your dog into a restaurant is insane behavior. It is disgusting. It's uncivilized. What the hell are you doing? What are you thinking? I took my kids out just this past Monday, actually. And I saw this. Somebody walked past our table with a dog on a leash. Not a service dog, okay? This was not a blind person or someone like that. It was just a dog. It was a dog, a regular old dog in the restaurant where we are eating. And I mean, it's out of control. It's beyond reasons, beyond any notion of common sense. You want to own a dog? Great. I have a dog too. It might surprise you to learn. I actually like my dog most of the time. She's a good dog, but you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to inflict my dog on anyone else. I'm always very aware of the fact that this dog it's our dog, it's our family's dog. And I'm not going to force anyone ever to have to deal with that if they don't want to. If we have guests over to the house, unless they specifically, if they love dogs and they want to interact with the dog, then great. But I'm not going to do that thing that's happened to me a million times. You go to someone's house and they have a dog, the dog's jumping all over you and they don't do anything to stop the dog from doing that. It's why would you think that I don't want your animal on? Can I not? Is it unreasonable that I don't want to have an animal crawling all over me? But I'm very sensitive to that. So if someone comes over, again, we put the dog in another room unless they say, "Oh, I want to go say hi to the dog." Well, great, then you can do that. I'm not going to force you to, though. And we're not, we're not bringing our dogs into a restaurant, a store, into places where dogs don't belong. There's no fundamental difference, okay, between bringing a dog into a restaurant and bringing a pig or a goat, okay, into a restaurant. It's the same idea. It's the same thing. We might have this rather arbitrary hierarchy in our minds of animals, and dogs in our minds are at the top of it because we think dogs are the cutest or whatever, but they're still animals. And they're not really fundamentally different from, like I said, a goat or a pig. And if I'm sitting down at a restaurant trying to, eat, sitting at an Italian restaurant eating some spaghetti and somebody walks by with a goat, okay, everybody would be disturbed by that. But somehow with a dog, it's supposed to be okay. They don't belong in restaurants. They don't belong in stores. And it still blows my mind that I am made to feel like I'm imposing on people when I bring my human children into a restaurant. Yet you've got these psychopaths bringing entire animals into restaurants, turning the dining experience into something unhygienic and animalistic. I'm at a restaurant, suddenly I feel like I'm at the concession stand at the zoo. I feel like I'm with my kids eating a $17 slice of pizza at the zoo concession stand. That's how I feel when you bring your pet into a restaurant. So don't do it. Stop doing it. It's terrible. How dare you? Let's get to the daily cancellation. Well, if you were smart enough to avoid social media over the weekend, then you probably missed this brief viral phenomenon. There was a glitch, as it was called anyway, at Chase Bank that allowed people to withdraw more money than they had in their accounts. The glitch went viral thanks to various TikTok videos of people celebrating their ill-gotten gains. Here's one.
Town, and I need you. miss you. And now I wonder if you know I walk 1,000 miles. Just say you tonight.
That's good. I hope Vanessa Carlton sues them for copyright infringement. I have to say I'm shocked. I'm shocked that those people would steal money like that. They seem so responsible and productive. I do take solace in one thing. They will certainly invest their money wisely and use it to better themselves and their community. Of that, I have no doubt. These are, without question, the future leaders of society. I wouldn't be surprised if someday soon all of the young men in that video are employed as brain surgeons or astronauts or even astronaut brain surgeons. And I wish I was joking, but we may actually reach that point. It is, after all, the logical endpoint of DEI. The endpoint, in more ways than one, is you on the operating table, fading away from the anesthesia, and the last thing you see is the kid from the TikTok video where he was throwing money in the air that he'd stolen from Chase Bank, standing over you and holding a scalpel. That's the image that you will take with you into the great beyond. Now, anyway, if you're wondering what the glitch is here, let me explain. Evidently, for a short period of time over the weekend, Chase Bank customers were able to deposit a fake check and then immediately withdraw the funds that didn't really exist. Now, smart people in the audience, or even just people with IQs above room temperature, immediately recognize that this glitch is actually just garden variety fraud. Not just any fraud, but the absolute dumbest kind of fraud you can ever commit. You are perpetrating fraud against an institution that has all of your information, your name, address, social security number, and will know exactly what you did, who you are, and how to find you. Not to mention, they control your bank account. This is like robbing a bank without a mask and wearing a t-shirt that has a big picture of your driver's license printed on it. It is, in a word, dumb. Very, very dumb. Here's The Independent with more, quote, "In a not-so-shocking development, a viral TikTok trend once again proved to be little more than a stupid stunt that ruined the lives of the impressionable. The trend involved people taking advantage of a glitch in JP Morgan Chase ATMs that allowed users to deposit a check without the available funds and immediately have access to the money listed on it. This is check fraud, but was shared across TikTok as a fun way to grab free money. In reality, Chase really did have a glitch, allowing the exploitation of its ATMs, but the company fixed the problem within days of its discovery. According to a representative who spoke to the New York Post, we're aware of this incident and has been addressed. Regardless of what you see online, depositing a fraudulent check and withdrawing the funds from your account is fraud, plain and simple. The spokesperson said once the glitch was fixed, Chase began to rectify the fraudulent withdrawals by deducting the stolen cash from users' accounts." Now, I'll note here that there was a separate rash of TikTok videos, viral TikToks, from users showing their accounts massively in the red, sometimes to the tune of $20,000 or $30,000 or more, because they'd taken advantage of the glitch. And then the bank came and took its money back, as it's going to do. It's not clear to me which of those videos are real. There's some indication that at least some of them are fake, which leaves us with another conundrum. Which is dumber? Making a video confessing that you committed check fraud and showing everyone your negative balance, or making a video pretending that you committed check fraud and showing a negative balance that doesn't exist? Is it stupider to be a low-rent fraudster or to pretend you are one for engagement? It's impossible to say. All we can say is that nobody in either group should be allowed to vote or drive a car or walk around outside without a chaperone. Here's a little more from the article, quote, "Jim Wang, a financial educator who spoke to the New York Post, warned that people who took advantage of the glitch could face severe consequences. He told the outlet that those who tried are now seeing big holds or huge negative balances in their accounts. Wang warned people who tried it could get into huge trouble for essentially committing check fraud." Yeah, you would think, Jim, you would assume that they'd be in huge trouble for committing check fraud openly and filming themselves doing it, but I think you're probably mistaken. I doubt that anyone will get in trouble, actually. Sure, the bank will take its money back. You can count on that. Banks are not going to take any pity on you. Banks and the IRS are very much alike in this way. They're going to get their money one way or another. That much you can count on. I mean, in the IRS's case, it isn't their money, it's yours, but they're going to get your money either way. That part is certain. But will there be criminal charges? I doubt it. I mean, that's not usually how this works. Maybe if the TikTok videos were mostly white frat boys taking advantage of the glitch, then the force of law would come down on them. But the demographics don't line up for that kind of response, and that means that most likely nothing will happen. And it's frustrating because this is the kind of brazen, shameless, shockingly casual criminality It would be so easy, incredibly, supremely easy to stop. It could be shut down without much effort. Some semblance of order could be restored to our society. We could have accountability again. And you can do that just by enforcing the law, is all. When there's a TikTok trend that consists of people committing check fraud, all you have to do is make a point of arresting everybody involved and charging them with every crime you can, followed by the max sentences. Bring down the hammer. Do it publicly. Find criminals like this and make an example out of them. Law and order could be restored in no time, but they won't do it because they don't want law and order. They want chaos. And that's what they'll get, along with a lot more dumb TikTok videos. And that's why the people exploiting the Chase Bank glitch and the people not holding those people accountable are all today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
Republicans are Nazis. You cannot separate yourselves from the bad white people.
Growing up, I never thought much about race. It never really seemed to matter that much, at least not to me.
Am I racist?
I would really appreciate it if you left.
I'm trying to learn. I'm on this journey.
If I'm going to sort this out, I need to go deeper undercover.
They gon' say I'm racist.
Joining us now is Matt, certified DEI expert.
Here's my certification. And what you're doing is you're stretching out of your whiteness. This is more for you in this field. Is America inherently racist?
The word inherent is challenging there.
I want to rename the George Washington Monument to the George Floyd Monument.
America is racist to its bones.
So inherently.
Yeah.
This country is a piece of
White.
folks,
White.
trash, white supremacy, white woman, white boy.
Is there a black person around? There's a black person right here. Does he not
They gon'
exist?
say I'm racist.
Hi, Robin.
Hi, what's your name?
I'm Matt.
It's had to ask who you are because you have to be careful.
Never be too careful.
They gon' say you racist.
Buy your tickets now. In theaters September 13th. Rated PG-13.